Good morning, everybody. It's great to see everybody this morning. We are still in January. It's hard to believe because it has been a very, very long month, but we are just about coming towards the end of it. My name is Dr. Wanda Wyporska, and I am the Executive Director of the Equality Trust. And the Equality Trust, for those of you who don't know us, is the national charity that campaigns to tackle social and economic inequality. And of course, you know, one of the key factors of inequality, income inequality in particular, is the work around gender discrimination in pay, whether it's gender bonus gaps, gender pay gaps, whether it's issues around childcare access, and of course, issues such as women on boards and the sorts of work that women are doing in terms of part-time work. And we have seen some excellent research from the Women's Budget Group, for example, and Fawcett Society, showing that now more than ever, looking at the role of women in the labour market is absolutely vital, because we are seeing women suffer disproportionately in terms of furlough and in terms of the pandemic and all of the associated issues that brings. So I'm really delighted that we are working with the University of Birmingham today, and I'm delighted to see so many of you here, and an absolutely fantastic range of speakers, an international range of speakers. So you know, we may not get to be going anywhere lately, but we can satisfy our wanderlust a little bit by inviting international guests. So it's really lovely to be working in collaboration. And I will stress, you know, we may be out of the European Union, but we are still in Europe. It's a geographical fact. So welcome to our international guests as well. So I'm just going to give a very quick overview of why the Equality Trust is working in this area. And we have what we call an Equal Pay 50 campaign. So you will all have realised that the legislation reached its 50th anniversary this year, and unfortunately, we are still fighting for equal pay. You know, the Equal Pay Act is older than I am, slightly, but we have seen generations of women go through the workplace, and we are still fighting for equal pay. And I think one of the issues for us really is around transparency. In our work on equal pay, what we've seen again and again, and what we've seen from work with trade unions, is that the lack of transparency in pay structures is an absolute key part of pay discrimination, whether we're talking about ethnic minority pay gaps, gender pay gaps, or other pay gaps. And we know from the Social Mobility Commission report that we also, being the UK, obviously, am fascinated with our sort of, you know, 18th, 19th century series of upstairs, downstairs, and people in bonnets, and, you know, these class structures. We also have a class pay gap. So transparency is absolutely key. And now that we've got to the 50th anniversary of the Equal Pay Act, we have seen, for example, that on average, around 29,000 women are still taking equal pay cases. And we know each year, and we know that this is only the tip of the iceberg, because many women are unaware of the fact that they're not being paid the rate that they should be. So we like, as an organisation, to be that bridge between academia and campaigning, to take the reports, to take the research, and to turn them into campaigning materials to make sure that people are aware of what's going on, and to sort of translate the research into something that people can understand and that people can take action on. So, for example, we developed a calculator that shows your potential lifetime earnings loss as a woman by looking at the data that was released for gender pay gap reporting, and calculating using that information. If a woman worked for 45 years at that organisation, how much they would stand to lose. And I think that really brings it home. You know, the people that use that calculator saw that over 45 years of working, they were losing hundreds of thousands of pounds. And that's very different to seeing figures bandied about of 9%, 10%, 18%, 17%. It really brings it home. So that's the sort of work we try to do. We've also got a data dashboard on the FTSE 100, which shows the gender bonus gaps, even more scary, clearly, than the gender pay gap, and the CEO pay gaps as well. So we're really, really pushing on this area to enable people to see the difference and to be aware of what's happening in their own workplaces. So that's enough from me. There are far more interesting speakers we have lined up to tell you about their particular areas. I just would like to say again, thank you very much to the University of Birmingham. This is a co-hosted event, so that's wonderful. I'd like to hand over to Dr. Scott Taylor, of the business school director of admissions at the University of Birmingham, who's going to introduce our first speaker. So thank you, Scott.
Thank you very much, Chidi. It's a real pleasure to be here. This is a workshop which was planned for March 2020. So we're really, really pleased to be running now at the end of a long January, as Chidi said. And this is an initiative which has been co-organised with our colleagues Joanne Duberley and Holly Burkett in the Work Inclusivity Research Centre here at Birmingham, and also in collaboration with our colleagues at the ACT Horizon 2020 gender equality work happening at the University of Iceland. So, as Chidi said, it's an international event, even if we're all at home or very close to our homes. The workshop is organised on the basis that there has been 50 years of legislation and activism and academic research and organisational action in the UK, but also globally. And I think that's what we're going to see today. Unfortunately, we do also have to talk about the pandemic and COVID-19, and we'll be thinking about that more towards the end of the workshop this morning. But thinking in particular about the research which has happened in the UK over the last 12 months, thinking about the example of Claire Wenham at the LSE and her arguments that linking viral risk to socioeconomic risk and noting the very significant differential effects of the last 10 to 12 months on women's earning capacity, but also engagement with the workplace. So it's a real pleasure to introduce the first speaker, Chidi King. Chidi is the director of the Equality Department at the International Trade Union Conference, International Trade Union Confederation. That's my second mistake this morning. And Chidi has worked for the UKTUC and also worked as a senior lawyer at the Protect whistleblowing charity. So Chidi, over to you. You have around about 20 minutes to talk to us and to take questions.
Thank you very much, Scott, and good morning to everybody. It's wonderful to see such a huge audience and an audience from around the world. Thanks already. Thanks as well to Dr. Wanda for opening up the session in such a rich way. I'm pleased to see in the audience, I have to give a shout out to them, that we have attendees from Zimbabwe, from South Africa, from Canada joining us. As you said, it truly is an international event, even if the focus is very much on the UK and what's happening in the UK. As Scott said, I'm the director of the International the Equality Department of the International Trade Union Confederation, and therefore very much come to this discussion with an international perspective and lens. And it strikes me that the question of equal pay or equal remuneration has been recognized by the International Labour Organization in its constitution as far back as 1919, so well over 100 years ago. And yet we're still in a situation where no country can say hand on heart that we have managed to eradicate the gender pay gap, even if some countries have come a lot closer than others. The ILO also has a convention, an international legal norm, Convention 100, which mandates equal pay for work of equal value between women and men. It was adopted back in 1951. It's been ratified by over 170 countries. And still we're in a situation, as I say, where no country can say that they have managed to close the gender pay gap. I would say that there are numerous factors behind that, and Wanda already set out some of those in her introduction, so I'm going to beat them to death, so to speak. But I think it's really important to bear in mind, especially for us as trade unions, that there are two issues, I would say fundamentally, that affect this inability for us to really close the gender pay gap in a more effective manner. One, of course, is discrimination. It's just pure and simple, actual and historic discrimination, the way society views women in the workforce at large, and then the way society views the types of jobs that women perform when we enter into the workplace. We know that the gender roles assigned to women by society very much affect, again, the types of jobs we are channeled into, and then how the value of those jobs is perceived and remunerated. And along with that goes a whole package around how work is organized. I would say that's the other fundamental issue that we need to look at when we talk about the gender pay gap. We're still very much living in a world of work that's organized around men working. Women and men, and I say women and men in the range of diversity that represents, not just the binaries, but rather than recognizing that we have to be organizing our work to allow everybody to be able to participate fully, that we have to be better at seeing that work-life balance is not just an issue for women workers, that it's an issue for all workers. We also have to be better at seeing that we can't even begin to talk about work-life balance when the majority of the world's workforces are really scrabbling to try to make a living, to try to put food on their plates, to try to put a roof over their heads, having to hold down 2, 3, 4, 5 jobs just to be able to get enough income in order to survive, never mind live well. And I think that's really fundamental in how we address the issue of the gender pay gap and how work is organized. And that's a real challenge for trade unions. We can't just go into the workplace and seek to bargain, for instance, around a narrow set of pay equity issues. We really need to look at how we bargain around the different elements, working time arrangements, for instance, parental leave arrangements, just basic, decent, secure jobs. So jobs that come with social protection attached to them, jobs that come with minimum income guarantees attached to them, jobs that are intentional in the way that they address legacy of discrimination, whether it's around sex, whether it's around race, whether it's around nationality, whether it's around LGBTI identities, for instance. These are issues that trade unions really need to be very intentional about looking at and about addressing if we're going to address the gender pay gap. And then, of course, looking at the policy measures that need to go around the collective bargaining measures, as a floor, if you like, and supporting collective bargaining in the workplace. And I know, I'm sure several of the other speakers are going to speak more directly to those, but addressing the issue of care, of course, is fundamental, and that how that affects women's ability to participate effectively and equitably in the workplace. Again, you don't need me to tell you that women form the majority of caregivers, whether at home or whether in the workplace. So, we have this duality of doing the majority of the unpaid care work in our homes, and we're seeing this play out even more starkly, of course, during this COVID pandemic. But when it comes to occupations that are caregiving occupations, again, you will find women predominating, but again, in the lower paid jobs often, and increasingly in the more precarious and the more informal roles. So having policy measures that recognize the centrality of care, both to our societies and our economies, is crucial. Having governments invest properly in the provision of care to support working families, working parents is absolutely crucial. But recognizing the real value of care and paying it according to its true value is also crucial. That would have not just a knock-on effect for the way jobs in the care sector itself are valued, but how other jobs where there is strong gender segregation, occupational gender segregation, are also valued. We know the role that minimum living wages can play in terms of boosting the pay of the lowest paid workers, who again tend to be, if I generalize, overwhelmingly women around the world. overwhelmingly again women from racialized communities and women who are disadvantaged by discrimination in society. So whether it's disabled women or women again from migrant communities or other marginalized groups. So having in place national minimum living wages that are applicable to everyone without distinction can be a crucial policy tool to help address the gender pay gap. Unfortunately, what we see is that most minimum wages around the world have been on statute books for forever, are hardly ever renewed. Some are sectoral, but there are huge gaps in terms of who has access, if anyone, to those minimum wages. But they are a vital policy tool. Social protection floors are another essential policy tool, I would say. And these are possible universally. Every single country in the world can afford to put in place. The research has been done, the modeling has been done to put in place a basic social protection floor, which can offer a set of minimum social security guarantees, including access to healthcare, essential healthcare, which includes maternity care, but a basic income guarantee. So when people are unable to work. It's also vital for workers in the informal economy, which is where the majority of the world's women also work. Those two sets of policy interventions, I would say, absolutely critical for women working in the informal economy and addressing the huge gender pay gap that exists because the majority of those in the informal economy are women, but also there are discrepancies in terms of pay, even in the informal economy between women and men, because of all the issues that have been touched on already regarding women's, the gendered roles assigned to women. Women working in the informal economy also tend to receive less income than men working in the informal economy. I'm conscious of time, but I'm not quite sure how much time I have left, Scott. So maybe I should be thinking of wrapping up there or pausing there in case there are questions or interventions from the audience.
Chidi, I'm going to speak for everyone without any democracy here at all, and say we're happy to listen to you for another 3-4 minutes. But if you do see something in the chat area that you'd like to speak to, then please do along the way.
Okay, thank you. In that case, maybe I'll just use the final few minutes to talk about the impacts of COVID, because we can't really talk about pay, the workplace, and the gender pay gap without really addressing very much the elephant in the room. The pandemic has already shown us the impacts of the discrimination that existed in our world of work already. We know, and this is true for across the world, that women have been particularly severely impacted by the social and economic consequences of the pandemic. The social consequences in terms of, even less access to childcare, for instance, or to be able to access other care services, whether it's elderly care or whether it's sexual and reproductive health services. We shouldn't forget those. These are crucial to the workplace as well. And of course, the shutting down of schools. In the US, the impact that this has had, just to give one statistic, is that because of the additional care responsibilities, but it also because of the sectors in which job losses have been in the highest, women have lost jobs or have fallen out of the labor force at a rate that exceeds that of men by 4 times. And that's just the US. You can imagine if we were to pull statistics from many other countries in the world, they would be unfortunately quite similar. We know that many of the modest gains that we have made so far are already in danger of being lost in the pandemic, through the pandemic. So again, the policy responses are urgent. The final words I'd say is that there are 2 initiatives I really want to draw attention to. One is what's happening in Europe around pay transparency and the push for a directive on pay transparency. This was something that the Commissioner promised to put in place, within the first 100 days of her taking over. So that's Ursula von der Leyen. But we're still waiting for the equal pay transparency directive. And in fact, the employers have been pushing back using COVID as an excuse, saying that this is not the time to put in place additional regulatory burdens on employers. So this is still not seen as a matter of social justice, of equality and fundamental rights, but a regulatory burden for employers. So there's a huge campaign by the ETUC, and I think I'm just going to try and see if I can succeed in sharing my screen, because I think they have brought some humor to their campaign. You can see there, this is a poster that the ETUC has been putting out outside of the European Parliament saying, you know, where is this missing pay transparency? To urge people to join their campaign, and I would urge you all to join in with the ETUC's campaign where you can. And then if I could just share my screen again, finally to wrap up by bringing attention, if I can see it, to the Equal Pay Coalition, which is an international coalition that's whose aim is to accelerate the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goal 8.5, which says that by 2030 we should all have, achieved. I don't know, it's a very ambitious target, but that by 2030 we should have achieved the goal of equal pay for work of equal value across the world. And there you can just see an example of the EPIC Secretariat and who they are. I'd really urge the Equality Trust to become a member of the Equal Pay International Coalition as well. So I'll stop there. I think I've used up my time now. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you very much, Chidi. If we were all in the same physical space, then we would all be giving a round of applause at the moment. I think it's really, really sort of inspiring and interesting to finish on a couple of practical actions that people can take, or that they can encourage their institutions to take. So just before we let you sort of step down from speaking, Fiona Carmichael raised a question in the chat area about the possibility that COVID-19 and the pandemic might actually raise the value of care. So I suppose thinking about that as a potentially a positive outcome of the terrible experiences that we're all having at the moment. Do you see that as a possibility?
I think it absolutely is a possibility, but I don't think it will happen on its own. I think this is something that we have to push for. You know, as many people have said, clapping just isn't enough. And as we saw in the first wave of the pandemic and the lockdowns, the solidarity that people showed with our workers and the health and care services in particular was so strong, but we're seeing it wane already, you know, in terms of people's compliance, if you like, with measures that are being put in place still to try to restrain the spread of the virus. When I look at if I look to the UK in particular, and we look at the Chancellor's autumn spending review, we see the allocation in that review to health and care services. We have to wonder if we've all been living in a parallel world, somehow, allocating, for instance, perhaps more money to defense, but not significantly adding to the budget for health and care services. So I think we do need to seize the moment where there is widespread recognition of how important and how central health and care is to us and our survival and our continued life here on this planet and sustaining the planet itself. I mean, when we talk about health and care jobs, we're talking about green jobs, we're talking about sustainable jobs, we're talking about jobs that will be there forever, no matter what is happening in terms of other transformations in our world of work, including the transformations being brought around by technology. But we have to campaign for it. And as global trade unions, we now have a Global Day of Action on the 29th of October every year, which is aimed at focusing attention on the centrality of care and the care economy and the conditions that workers in the care economy need and deserve, including pay and other working conditions.
That's as clear as can possibly be. Thank you very much, Chidi. Joan Ballantyne in Northern Ireland has noted that those working in the health sector in Northern Ireland are going to receive a one-off £500 payment, and that seems to be the preferred approach of the UK government, is to provide a kind of bonus, not to change the wage structure, for example, or to think about longer term action and activity. There's one final comment in the chat area from Katrina Waters at Birmingham, asking you, Chidi, to talk to her about measures around the organisation of work and what would be required to make fundamental change. And I'm going to ask you can you reply to that in the chat area? Would that be okay? Unless it's like a 10-second answer, which I don't think.
No, I'm happy to try to have a go at that in the chat area. Just not to take up another speaker's time. That's fine.
Thank you very much. But thank you for providing us with the best introduction possible to the workshop this morning. So thank you very much, Chidi, from the International TUC. So we take a deep breath, and move on to our second presenter this morning, or third if we include Wanda, which I think we should. So following on from Wanda's introduction, and then Chidi's overview of particularly sort of transnational and cross-border trade union activity and the possibility of fundamental changes in these areas. Professor Geraldine Healy, who's Professor of Employment Relations at Queen Mary University of London, and founder and first director of the Centre for Research into Equality and Diversity there, which I think it's right to say, Geraldine, is the premier research centre in this field in the UK, without any question. It has been for some time. So pioneering work which has gone on there in the East End of London for a long time in this area under Geraldine's direction. Geraldine's particularly interested in intersectional experiences of discrimination, inequality regimes, and following on from Chidi's presentation, collectivism as well. So Geraldine's going to speak to the title of The Complexity of Gender Pay Gaps and Drivers for Change for the next 15 to 20 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much, Scott, and thank you, Fiona and Wanda, for inviting me to this event, and thanks to Chidi for an amazing first presentation. I hope to build on that to some extent. What I'd like to do is to talk about the drivers that sustain unequal pay and the pay gap, and also present briefly some findings from two case studies that we have done at Queen Mary, and present finally some drivers for change, hopefully. You've got a great title, The Long Road. I just hope that in the age of Me Too and Black Lives Matter, that road will be long and will be shorter and straighter. However, COVID may well mediate and cause more problems with respect to the battle for equal pay. I'm very aware that when we talk about equal pay and the gender pay gap, we need also to talk about intersectional differences. We may be talking about women, but women are not all the same. They differ by class, by ethnicity, disability, sexuality, religion, nationality. And these differences are very important because they play into the pay gap experience. So some women may actually benefit in some ways because of their identities, and others may lose because of their identities. So I think when we talk about equality of pay and pay gaps, we need to bear this in mind. And certainly there has been an increasing interest in the ethnicity pay gap in the UK. Carol Woodham's work has argued that where you have one disadvantaged identity mapping with another disadvantaged identity, then actually those penalties are exponentially increased. So this is really important to bear in mind as we talk. Also, I think it's really important that trade unions too have taken up the struggle for not only gender pay gaps and reducing gender pay gaps, but also ethnicity pay gaps. The dispute between the Universities and Colleges Union and the Employers Association was part of fighting for gender and ethnicity pay, the 4 fights. Now, the drivers for unequal pay and the gender pay gap are fairly well known, but I just want to remind us, and partly Chidi has talked about these, human capital. When we know now, internationally, I think women in many ways are better qualified than men. You've got more young women coming out of universities, certainly in the majority of countries. So we can't now claim that's a reason, although it may be used. Vertical and horizontal segregation. Men and women are separated often in the kind of work we do. We've already talked about care work, that women dominate care work. So they're separated from the majority of men. And interestingly, it's women and migrants who do care work in the UK. And men tend to dominate the hierarchies of organisations. Now, also, what's absolutely critical, and where I think a lot of work can be done by unions and by individuals, is in workplace practices. And workplace practices cover a whole range of things: pay systems, the way discretion is used, bonus allocation, and social practices that exclude some women and are more inclusive of male culture. And the level of pay that's actually given. One of the things we have to recognise in the UK is that we have a low pay problem. And finally, as Chidi mentioned, the unexplained reasons for the pay gap and for unequal pay. Discrimination. We know through stereotyping, cultural discrimination on reproductive capacity, regardless of whether women have children or not. Attitudes, pregnancy discrimination is rife in this country. Harassment, and as has already been mentioned and will be developed further in this workshop, undervaluation of women's work. And the consequence of this is a pensions gap. Across Europe, nearly 40% of the pensions gap is nearly 40%. So it's about 39 in the UK, the average is about 35, 36. Some countries go up to 46, and others it's much, much lower. So women live in poverty, are more likely to live in poverty than are men. And alongside that, I can't resist mentioning the CEO ratio to average pay. In 1998, it was 47 to 1. The Labour Party would actually quite like it to be 20 to 1. By January 2019, it was 133 to 1. And the highest paid FTSE 100 CEO received a total package of 58.73 million. That's 1,935 times the median salary of a full-time worker. Now, if we said it was a full-time female worker, that number would go up again. And we know there are differences by sector and occupation. So my first case study that I want to mention is on financial services. And financial services is really interesting because they have been shamed time and time again for their pay practices. They were called out by the Walker report following the recession, saying that unsafe remuneration policies were critical. And at the same time, the EHRC called them out as having unfair practices and required them to change. High pay gap, long working hours, male-dominated culture were all part of the characteristics that led to the alpha male culture identified by subsequent Treasury committees. Nevertheless, when we looked at them, we found a resilience of gender pay gap at all levels. The lower down the hierarchy you are, the smaller the pay gap. The higher up the hierarchy you go, the larger the pay gap. and factors that indicated a higher pay gap included ethnicity and also included working hours. Long working hours actually had increased since the recession. Our second case study is one, of course, dear to my heart, it's universities. And here again, we see similar patterns. At the lower level of the pay distribution, the pay gap is less. And we're talking about academics here who below professorial level have their pay determined by collective bargaining. And there the pay gap is less. For professors, the pay gap widens because there's no collective bargaining coverage. Also, our analysis by ethnicity revealed a consistent, unexplained pay gap across university type, rank for Black academics and Asian women. And we also noted that the pay gap was far greater in pre-1992 universities, the more research-intensive universities than in the post-1992 universities, where the pay gap was better. However, the pay was better in the old universities compared to the new. So we cannot equate pay and the gender pay gap. Okay, that's a really important point. We also know that academics have key points in their career where they can negotiate. So even the spine, they can, there is discretion. So it's not true that women don't negotiate, but it is true that women get less far in their attempts to negotiate than men, so that the discretion may be used more to favour men than to favour women. My colleague Emily Pfeffer's just completed her PhD, where she shows that pay secrecy is often used as a shield to avoid discussions on pay. I'm sorry, I cannot discuss other colleagues' pay. Okay, nice one, that one. Academics are more likely to talk about pay when they're senior. Professors are more likely to talk about pay than senior lecturers or lecturers. And I think that's really interesting, perhaps because they feel they've more to gain. So even Spine's discretion can be used. In Britain, we've had regulations on pay transparency for gender. They appeared for 1 year. They were stopped last year because of COVID. Apparently they're going to run again this year. We've also had consultation on regulations on ethnicity pay regulations. We've been waiting 2 years for the outcome of that consultation. I'll leave that one with you. Excuse me. So the drivers for change then, because it's really quite extraordinary how this situation has continued. As Chidi said, it goes way back, longer than the 50 years. What we do know is that women's work is undervalued in different ways, multiple ways, and that plays out. So where are the drivers for change? Well, they lie with the government, with unions, with social movements, equality organisations, employers, and of course the individual. And just to summarise that, with respect to government, legislation does need to be tightened and simplified. Gender pay gap regulations need to be tightened. Action plans should be compulsory. Sanctions should be there when employers don't comply with the rules. Public sector freezes need to be stopped. They disproportionately disadvantage women. Increase the living wage, the real living wage, and that will improve women's pay. And the starting salary, we should have information that you should not ask about the current starting salary. That should be unlawful because that repeats the cycle of disadvantage. Now, unions and employers, collective bargaining matters. Collective bargaining does matter. Equal pay audits need to be widely used. Non-disclosure agreements should be, with respect to equality of pay, should be banned. So many cases are silenced because of this. Women's work needs to be valued fairly, of course. If we consider care workers as unskilled, as we often hear said on the news, and yet we know what they do, these are highly skilled people paid as unskilled. And what can we do as individuals? Well, actually, we can probably do quite a lot. We can talk about pay. We can stop this pay taboo. Why is there a taboo on talking how much you earn? It plays into the hands of unfair employers, and employers are reluctant to, obviously, because of the length of time we've waited, are reluctant to pay equally. So we need a means to remove pay secrecy. Pay isn't secret in Norway, and it is actually a more equal society. The gap between the rich and the poor is less. We also need to talk about intra-organisational pay. We were really interested in our academic study when we looked at business schools, and we looked at pay in the different disciplines within business schools. And of course, there's a pay gap between for example, economics and HRM teaching. Now this is interesting, isn't it? Because the job is essentially the same. So is this a means, a road to unfair pay claim? We'll leave that one again with you. And we as individuals also need to support social movements, organisations like the Equality Trust, trade unions, and various gender charities. And I'd just like to say that we need to remember that equal pay benefits not just women, but society. And current pay determines future pensions and determines whether a woman will spend her old age in poverty or comfort. So in conclusion then, the gender pay gap is not just reporting, and transparency alone is important. It makes a difference. It enables us to compare and contrast, but it will not solve the problem of unequal pay unless there is pressure from women within organisations and pressure from outside. These will be crucial in reducing unequal pay and raising awareness of other unequal pay gaps, including top managers vis-a-vis average workers. So finally, let's be realistic with respect to the gender pay gap. You may work in an organisation that has a narrow pay gap and low pay, which is not good. Equally, you may have a high gender pay gap and high pay. So we should not conflate the two. Therefore, we shouldn't let gender pay gap distract us from investigating equal and unequal pay. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. That was followed on so well from what Chidi had spoken about in the first presentation, and I think it also speaks forward to our next presentation, which we'll come to in just a moment. But that was so interesting and so packed full of stuff. I want to ask one of the people in the room, Fiona Gandiwa Magaya, Fiona, if you'd like to unmute your microphone and to ask the question that you put into the chat area, that would be fantastic. I'll give you a few seconds, and if you don't unmute your microphone and ask a question, then I'll do it, but I think everyone would prefer you to do it yourself. So go ahead, Fiona.
Thank you, Chair. My question was relating to, can you hear me? Hello?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. My question was, yes, my question was related to the culture. When Geraldine was presenting, she mentioned culture is one of the issues that hinder the, yes, I do agree with that. But my question is, how is the transparency directive that you were talking about going to deal with that aspect of culture where women are taken as subordinates to men, and everyone expects that a woman is supposed to be taken care of by a man? Hence, employers will not see the value of giving equal pay to women because they believe they've got men at home that are taking care of them. So my question is, how is the Transparency Directive going to treat our culture in the world that actually oppresses women? Because I believe the first port of call is for the world to actually acknowledge that women are equal beings and they can contribute immensely to the economy of the world. Thank you, Chair.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Fiona. Geraldine, go ahead.
Well, thank you for the question, Fiona. It's a great question. I agree with your last sentence. Of course, the problem is that many employers don't agree with it. Will the transparency regulations change culture? It's a tricky one, isn't it? I do think that what they will do is raise conversations about equality of pay, and that matters. So people will start to question. It may well indirectly give voice to more people to ask questions and say, why are we doing this? Why are we holding this meeting in this pub? Why are we doing X, Y, Z? And standing up and not putting up with some of the demeaning behavior that women experience. It's a circuitous route. I don't think it will change culture overnight by any means. And I don't see it as the only solution. I see the solution as well by women and men. Men have a part to play here, standing up within organisations and not tolerating unfair practices.
Super. Thank you so much, Geraldine. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for responding to Fiona's question. As you say, it's a really, really good question. And if we could work backwards from directives and legislation changes to changes of culture, then I think we would all be a lot happier. But in the meantime, thank you so much, Geraldine, for that second presentation. That was super. I don't know how to put your hand up on this thing, but there is a little applause button, isn't there, Frankie, somewhere? There it is. Yes, brilliant. Okay, thank you so much, Geraldine. So if we take another moment just to reflect on the three speakers so far, and we'll move on to our fourth speaker before we have a short break at 10:40 at 22:11. And our fourth speaker this morning is an immediate colleague of ours here at Birmingham, who we haven't met because we work in different schools, obviously, and it's Dr. Meghan Campbell, who's a senior lecturer in law here. And Meghan's going to speak to the title of Transformative Equality, ? Making the Sustainable Development Goals Work for Women. So Meghan, over to you for the next 20 minutes.
Great, thank you so much. And it's really lovely to be here this morning. And thank you to everyone for organizing and giving your time and participating. So the Sustainable Development Goals commit the world to achieve gender equality and empower all women. But when you look at the targets, it's actually quite surprising that there isn't any reference to equal pay, although there is the broad overarching one of eliminating discrimination. And my presentation is going to look at this concept of equality and what kind of role it plays in women's equal pay, and particularly looking at what a substantive or transformative concept of equality can help us understand both how to achieve women's equal pay and how it can positively feed in to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And I'll start by kind of going through this sort of old historical, highly critiqued, outdated model of equality to show its limits, and then think about what does a transformative or substantive equality model bring to both reformulating laws and policies around pay and work and care, really. So the initial formulation of claims for pay, or like women should be paid the same as men, a very formal idea of equality. Two people are doing the same job, they should be paid the same amount of money. So very, very intuitive, very, not a particularly radical concept. It's a very formalistic approach, consistency, identical treatment between men and women. But it quickly became apparent this was a very limited approach to really achieving women's equal pay, because it ignores antecedent disadvantage, and it ignores the way that patriarchal norms and structures can trap women into low-paid work. Another really big problem with this kind of formalistic approach to equal pay claims is that formal equality is happy or satisfied if women or men receive the same amount of pay. And what can happen is that if men's pay decreases, if men's pay gets leveled down through austerity, recessions, depressions, then on a formal equality metric, you've achieved equality, even though all you've really achieved is lowering men's pay to make it equally bad off as women's pay. And that kind of model of equality isn't really what we're trying to achieve when we think about women's claims for equal pay. That's why it's always important, I think, to be kind of skeptical when you can see organizations kind of trot out, oh, we've achieved equal pay. It's always worth questioning, how have they achieved equal pay? Because sometimes it can be because men's wages have been decreasing. So it's always skeptical when people make great claims that they've achieved equal pay. So the lack of attention to how gender structures and norms work within the workplace and the home, the sort of failure of kind of equal pay made the next push to be about thinking at getting equal pay for work of equal value. And that is a richer claim that is moving beyond identical treatment. It's not just, do we pay women and men the same amount for the same job, but it's a kind of radical call that's asking for a rethinking of what is valuable work and what is fair remuneration for work. And it's a concept, equal pay for work of equal value is based on substantive or transformative equality. And so rather than seeking just mere consistency with men's pay within a sort of same job framework, substantive equality, drawing on Professor Sandra Fredman's four-dimensional model, is looking to achieve four things. It's looking to redress women's disadvantage, to overcome stigma, prejudice, and stereotyping, to transform institutions and structures rather than requiring women to conform to a male-dominant pattern, and to enhance women's agency and voice. And addressing each of these dimensions offers a richer analytical framework for tackling the gender pay gap. So for the rest of my presentation, I'll go through the four dimensions and think about how we can use them to bring a holistic approach to tackling unequal pay. And they'll draw, some of these recommendations and insights will both draw on Chidi and Geraldine's presentations. There are definitely some synergies going on, which is good. That means there's emerging consensus about how equal pay should be tackled. So the first dimension is redressing disadvantage. And this aligns really well with target 5.6 of the SDGs about improving women's equal rights to economic resources. As we know, women are concentrated in low-paid, precarious, part-time, and informal work. And this work is so often exempt from legal regulation and legal protection. And not only are they concentrated in sort of the non-decent work part of the economy, they're also segregated together. So women, we all know the gender horizontal and vertical segregation exists within the economy, and that women tend to be congregated in sectors such as caring, cleaning, clerical work, sectors of the economy that are both low paid and low status. And on a formal approach to equality, there isn't any problem because we pay all the cleaners the same wage, we pay all the nurses the same wage. So there is no, on a formal equality model, we can't see any inequality because no one woman is being paid more than the other. They're all being paid badly and they all congregate in poorly paid, poorly recognized, poorly protected professions. And it's not accidental that they're in these professions. They didn't all choose just sort of independently with sort of complete freedom of choice choose these professions. They are in these concentrated, low paid, low status professions because of these larger gender norms on the value of women and the value of certain types of work and women's role in caring work. And to then address this disadvantage that exists because of this gender segregation of work, there are some really important policy interventions that can happen both at the macro level through government and through employers themselves. And one which has been mentioned before is increasing minimum wage. It's been shown to be a really effective target to help improve women's pay. Another is to ensure when conducting pay audits within a workplace, that the pay audit doesn't ignore certain sectors of the workplace. So sometimes pay audit will only include, sometimes in universities, it only include the professors, or only include the academic staff, and it won't include professional services, or it won't include janitorial or cleaning staff. And if you're not including those sectors in the equal pay audit, you're going to end up masking the extent of the unequal pay. So the equal pay audit has to be inclusive of all people within the workplace and not kind of segmented off to maybe hide or mask the extent. Because of gender job segregation, you could be ignoring a big source of unequal pay. And the other big one that needs to happen, and this is particularly in relation to law, is allowing for cross-industry comparisons to show up unequal pay. The law tends to be very hesitant about sometimes laws will be drafted to not allow you to compare daycare workers or construction workers. And if you don't have a basis of comparison across an industry, so if you're just the industry that's mostly women, and you don't have anyone to point to say, we have unequal pay, and the law can put up barriers to not allow cross-industry comparisons, we need to take those apart so we can show how unequal pay works in relation to gender segregation in the workforce. So that's one way we can think about redressing disadvantage. The second dimension of substantive equality is overcoming stigma, prejudice, stereotype, and violence. And this really tracks on well to target 5.4 in the SGDs, about recognizing the value of care work and talking about the value of domestic work, and maybe more largely the value of women's work. And both Geraldine and Chidi touched on this. Our idea of what pay is for, pay is a reward or compensation for labor exerted. And what is this kind of judged or seen as meritorious work is deeply connected to gender stereotypes about what counts as good work or what counts as meritorious work. And these gender stereotypes can be subtle, and sometimes they can be obvious. Some examples of this can speak best to my own experience in academia is that certain types of scholarship might be seen as more prestigious than other types. This can be particularly true for feminist scholarship or critical race studies scholarship. So certain types of work that people perform, some is seen as prestigious, some is seen as kind of grunt, unrecognized, unvalued work, and they can often get tracked onto gender. So when we're thinking about pay promotions, pay increases, who gets what kind of pay, we need to be very aware that how we've decided what's meritorious work has been deeply coded with gender norms. Often the skills, working styles, management practices of women are seen as less worthy of reward or less recognized. And so if we're aware of this relationship between pay, merit, reward, promotion, and gender, it's really crucial that when we're both crafting and applying promotion and pay criteria, that we recognize a wide range of skills and not just reward sort of stereotypical male dominant norms about what it means to be a good worker. The other aspect of overcoming stigma that's necessary for equal pay is about the type of work that women perform. The stereotypical work that women perform in the home, caring, cleaning, cooking, tends to be the type of work that women then perform in the market. And because they do this work for free in the home, it's undervalued in the market. And we need to ensure that we're really challenging, as Geraldine and Chidi both mentioned, they do that, care work is work, and it's really socially valuable work that needs to be adequately recognized for the work that it is. It's not just something that nurses, daycare workers, teachers, that it's performed for free. It is work. And I think we need to push hard against recognizing all different types of work and to remove the gender biases in what is considered work. Gender neutral job evaluations are really crucial for flushing out gender norms that have negatively affected women's pay, and to ensure that the effort and skill responsibility that women expend is properly recognized as valuable, meritorious work. A third aspect of overcoming stigma, which I'll just sort of briefly highlight, is around violence and sexual harassment. Women's risks of experiencing violence can manifest in many different ways. They might not be able to stay late at work because it's too risky to walk home late at night, so they cannot put in the extra hours. Or sexual harassment can stop women from progressing up a workforce. So we really need to be also aware of the way that the risks and vulnerabilities around sexual harassment and sexual violence stop women. Sorry, the sun decided to come out right while I'm presenting, so there's a lot of light on my face right now. Apologies. The way that violence and the way that patriarchy works to create risks and fears of violence trap women in low pay as well. The third dimension is about transforming structures. And this tracks on well the target 5.4 on the SDGs about shared responsibility for care. So the motherhood penalty is well known, it's well documented. If you become a mother, you're likely to take a pay hit in the long term, as opposed to men when they become fathers. And this requires us to really rethink how we've structured both life in the home and life in the workplace. And I think it's important in this dimension of substantive equality, it's not about helping the woman craft a better work-life balance. Let's give the mother a bunch of time management skills courses and then she'll be able to do both amazingly. It's that individualizes the equal pay problem. It's not, she's not the problem that needs to be fixed. It's the larger structures that have, particularly the employment structure that is based on the historical idea that a man would go work outside and a woman would stay home. Well, that doesn't correspond to reality anymore, and we have to rethink how the workplace can accommodate or needs to really change the fact that we all have caring responsibilities and work responsibilities. It's not about fixing mom as the individual to make her a better worker and a better carer. And there are a series of interventions, and this is just a snapshot of interventions that are needed. Some of them are about, workload, making sure people's workload fits the working hours of the day. If there's always this creep in workload, it's going to spill over into your home life. And that's on the employer to manage what is a workload within the standard working week, working day. And the other is about, this links well to the recognition dimension, about seeing care as a socially valuable thing that isn't just the mother's responsibility, but that is redistributed away from the mother to two sources, I would say. Men, which we talked about, bringing men into the home. And this law has a role here, particularly about very carefully targeted legal interventions about paternity leave and paternity care, both about the level of pay, the level of men's entitlement to have protected care work in the home, and to destigmatize norms around taking up that pay. I have a doctoral student who's doing some interesting research about when men take on caring roles in the home, they face similar stigmas around, you're not a very dedicated worker anymore if you take up your paternity leave. So we need to be thinking about how to create structures, legal policies, awareness raising campaigns about the value of men being in the home. And the second is that care needs to be redistributed to the state. If we really see care as a socially valuable thing, as this act of solidarity of community, about taking care of each other, the state needs to have a more active role in providing care rather than having it solely be placed on the burden of the individual woman. And the idea of free public provision of care is probably the most radical of that, restructuring how we think about care and work.
Meghan, I'll give you a 2-minute warning because you're generating a lot of questions in the text.
Oh, perfect. Okay, then
We're also speaking back to Geraldine's and Chidi's presentations. So
sure, I will wrap up because I have actually only one more to mention. It's about enhancing women's voice, which is target 5.5. And women need to be empowered to speak up and claim their equal pay, and the systems have to be designed to allow that. And as Geraldine mentioned, there's so many cultural norms about not talking about pay. And the system right now places a lot of individual burden on women to claim it. And that can be both financially expensive and socially risky. So we need to have, as Geraldine mentioned, laws that both mandate pay audits and that you have to correct your pay imbalance. You don't just have to find it, you have to do something about it. And that women should be participating in these creation of job criteria, promotion criteria, pay criteria, and audits, that women's voice is active in the workplace in creating the structures that will allow them to have equal pay. So it's more of a community response rather than saying an individual woman needs to take the burden of going to court to fight her claim. So I'll wrap up there, but with attention to those 4 dimensions gives a more holistic, wider set of policy and legal interventions that are needed to really dismantle this stubborn pay gap.
Fantastic, thank you, and thank you for wrapping up sort of quickly there. We have, I think, a really, really interesting question in the text area, which I'm going to ask Shireen Kanji to unmute the microphone and to speak to us, and then perhaps we'll take it into the break. So I'm really keen that all the speakers get a full 10-minute break. And in fact, everyone in the room gets a full 10-minute break. So Shireen, if you'd like to just ask a question, and then perhaps we can take it into the 10-minute break. Over to you, Shireen.
Yeah, great, thanks. So thanks so much for your comments on skills. I think that is really important. And I was just wondering that in a way, we all identify that there are lots of skills that, you know, it's sort of not just women, but particularly people who are involved in caring gain a lot of skills. It's not just that they are atrophying if they're not in the labour market. They're getting these skills. And I wondered, you know, what steps would you need to take in order, or how do we get these skills recognised? What's the sort of route through which they can be recognised?
To ask you to answer that question in 30 seconds, Meghan.
I think that's $1,000 question, because I think you're right that caring work does generate skills about empathy, about listening, about, you know, conflict de-escalation. All these things are valuable in a workplace. And
management skills too, a lot of management skills.
Completely. And dealing with people who have conflicting interests and resolving conflict and how they get fed in to be recognized is something I have found a struggle in my own professional life, that the care and I expend towards students, I don't feel is always recognized as a valuable source of work. And I think it is a constant, and it's a lot of work also, because I think it's on sort of advocates and allies within the workplace to always be reminding that this is work, what I'm doing. This is a socially valuable employment value thing that I'm doing, and it needs to be recognized. And I think having open it's really difficult, but having open conversations about pay promotion, about criteria for merit and reward is the kind of usually the entry point to saying we need to be rewarding these type of skills as well and this type of work. But some workplaces are better adapted to have those conversations than others. So it's not, I think it relates to Fiona's question earlier about culture change, and Geraldine and Chidi's response that culture change is really slow, but I think we have to start somewhere, and at least at the individual workplace, having collective conversations around women could be an entry point.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Meghan and Geraldine and Chidi and Wanda for bringing us in on time. We've got a 10-minute break now.
Welcome back, everybody. And this is the second half. And thanks everybody for the first half. Hopefully the second half, and I'm sure it will be, is going to be as exciting and interesting as the first. We've got a completely different set of speakers. And our first speaker is Daniel Perez del Prado, who is speaking to us from Madrid. And he is a professor of workplace rights and social security. And there is a link to your talk, Meghan, in that Daniel has a background in law and economics. So there is a link from the previous session. So Daniel's background in law and economics means he's taking a mostly interdisciplinary approach to his research, and he's written on social law and labour economics, which gives you a taste for what he's going to talk about. And today, as I say, he's going to talk about workplace rights and social security, which I kind of think will have a Spanish focus. But over to you, Daniel, if you'd like to share your screen.
Okay, so well, before showing my screen, I would like to say thanks for this kind of presentation, and thanks for the invitation. And additionally, as it's the first activity that I share with my dear British colleagues, I have to say that this I'm very, very happy of sharing this time with my dear European colleagues from the islands, beside the rest of the Europeans, and even further the limits of Europe. And now I'm going to share my screen. Can you see it? Yes, excellent. So just okay. So My main task for today is speaking about the economics of equal pay in times of austerity, which is the title of the presentation, and particularly focusing on my country in Spain. As Fiona mentioned, I'm not only a lawyer, but also an economist. Everybody has a dark side. And so first of all, I would like to spend some time just showing some graphs and data concerning pay gap, comparing different countries and showing you the situation in Spain. Then I will pay attention to the evolution of the regulation in my country. And finally, I would like to highlight the most recent developments, which are in line with some of the ideas that were shared in the first part of the seminar, transparency particularly, and also the assessment of data and the evaluation of salary structures as well. So going into the first part, this graph here shows the pay gap for different European countries, including the average of the European Union. As you can see, the red line, the red column is Spain, and we have a relatively good position, at least below the European average, which is around 15%, and in our case, 12%. By the way, in the case of the UK, is around 20. The best country is Luxembourg with 1.4, and the worst country Estonia with more than 21%. And if we focus on the evolution, I would say that the general trend is decreasement, fortunately, but with different velocities. In the case of Spain, again, the red line quicker and bigger decreased. And in the case of Germany or the UK, again, the evolution is smoother. Anyway, maybe the two main points of these new graphs are, on the one hand, countries with better levels or better results concerning equality from a general perspective, such as Sweden, have also better results considering gender equality as well, in this case, gender pay gap. And the second point is the richer the country, the greater disparity. And that means also bigger problems concerning the resolution of this problem. Here you have also the case of Poland with reduced gender pay gap, but also with an economy which is smaller than the rest of the countries compared here. And my last slide focus on one of the reasons of gender pay gap, which is particularly the type of job. As you can see here, the gender pay gap, this is only for my country, for Spain, is bigger in the case of part-time jobs compared to full-time jobs. Again, the intense use of part-time jobs by female workers means that they are going to suffer pay gap more intensely than when they have a full-time job. This is one of the reasons, but not the only one. As you know, there are very different reasons, some of them related to the measuring of the pay gap, and related also with the introduction of different productive sectors and the distribution of the working population in those sectors. But besides these problems, there are also others, such as the clear discrimination and glass ceiling, and others which are, from my personal point of view, quite interesting, the ones related to the skills and the studies, and how these the percentage of females in some grades stems by, for example, determines the future task that they are going to develop, and consequently also the pay gap. Anyway, this would be the context. And facing this problem, my country has followed this evolution. As you know, our democracy is quite young. It was born in 1978. So at the beginning, the first step in this evolution was the development of case law. Our legal tools were very, very new. So we used them, the Constitution, the Spanish Constitution, for example, the Article 14, which is the principle of equal treatment, and some particular rules, for example, the prohibition of wage discrimination in the Workers' Statute, which is our employment law, the Article 28. So there was not special law for gender issues, but we used the general tools that we had in that time. And for example, concerning the case law, maybe one of the most famous cases was the Constitutional Court judgment 155 from 1991. It was about a hospital here in Madrid. And again, areas or sectors which are quite common. Cleaners, which are represented by, or in which female workers are overrepresented, and peons or laborers. The salary for each type in which male workers were overrepresented. Obviously, the salary in the case of peons were higher than in the case of cleaners, and the Constitutional Code declared that despite the activities were different, the value of the activities were exactly the same one, so they were comparable. And accordingly, it declared this distinction in the salary as void. There was discrimination. After this first period, the second one was characterized by this law here, the Organic Law 3/2007. There was a former law in 1999, but this is the most important one. It was we call it integral law, which is comprehensive law that is regulating different areas: social security, employment law, education, even criminal law as well. And concerning pay gap, maybe the two main advances with this law were, on the one hand, the introduction of some concepts that were in the case law, such as direct discrimination, indirect discrimination, or positive action, but not in the law itself. And the second advance were the introduction and the regulation in detail of the equality plans. It was an obligation in that time for companies hiring more than 250 employees. And the recent developments after more than a decade after this law, Organic Law 3/2007, we realized, or the government realized, that there were some problems in the application. It was a good law. It introduced very, very important advances, but as other legal tools, it is possible to improve it. And according to, or in order to improve the regulation of this law, recently the government passed these two new standards. On the one hand, the Royal Decree Law 6/2009, which is a law, a general law, focus on, I have to insist, that improving the previous organic law from 2007. And then the Royal Decree 902 from 2020, this is in the pandemic, which develops the previous one in the particular area of salary. So it focuses on avoiding pay gap and pay discrimination. Analyzing both from the salary perspective, they both aim to fight against discrimination in the remuneration, and particularly they introduce transparency. That was one of the points which were highlighted at the beginning of the seminar today, and it is an advance, or it's going some steps, or it's taking into consideration the future directive on transparency. and particularly the measures concerning pay gap are the following ones. First of all, extending the equality plans to smaller companies from employing from 250 employees to only 50 employees. Secondly, wage discrimination is sanctioned, such as a serious misconduct, so the fine is bigger, and the consequences are also clarified. That is, the contract is declared void, there's a compensation, and additionally the fine that I've mentioned. It also introduces some regulation concerning job classification and remuneration system. And this regulation is quite detailed because it sets what kind of factors should be included in order to do job classification and remuneration system in collective bargaining agreements. And finally, from my personal perspective, the two most important measures, remuneration records, which is an obligation for all companies without considering the size. That means that all companies are obliged to record these salaries considering different factors, and obviously the ones for male workers and the ones for female workers. And if there's a difference of more than 25%, the company is obliged to try to justify the reasons of that difference. And the second measure is the salary audits. This is set only for companies employing more than 50 employees, but that's an extra obligation. There's not only a record, but additionally an analysis, an annually analysis considering the remuneration in the companies. As I've mentioned, the most important objective here is introducing transparency in order to, as the best tool, in order to fight against pay gap and discrimination. By the way, these new measures are not only applied to private companies, but also to the public administration. Summing up, I started speaking some data, and data are also important here, because the new rules are going to need data, not only the record of this data within the company, but also the assessment of this data in order to know if this problem exists in the companies, and in order to provide the information, especially to the employees representatives and the employees themselves, as the best tool to introduce transparency and solve, or trying to solve, this problem. And that's all. Thank you so much.
Gracias, Danielle. That was really interesting. I think it was good to see the link, how we've been talking about the problems and what can be done, and then kind of seeing almost a case study of the kind of things that can be done in obviously a different country. And one of your colleagues has shared the link to the Spanish law in the English version, if anybody's interested or wants to follow up on that. We've had a couple of interviews. We've just got a few minutes. So there's a couple of questions, but I'm not 100% sure if there might be, one of them might be a rather difficult question, and I'm not sure if anyone knows the answer to this question, but anyway, give it a go, Daniel. Someone's asked, in your economics hat rather than your law hat, someone has asked, is there a correlation between labour market participation of women and the pay gap? I suppose another way of thinking about that might be, so for example, you've given this example of law changes in Spain. Is Spain a country with high participation of women? Is the pay gap or changes? Is there any correlation with, you know, the participation of women in the labour market? Sorry, I've expressed that terribly.
I've never seen a research analysis focusing on that area particularly, but I would say, but the research analysis that I know said that obviously there's, I don't know if it's correlation, but the relationship between the representation or the percentage of women within the trade unions or employee representation and the working conditions. And particularly some problems, especially related to women, such as this one, have been taken into consideration nowadays, not only because nowadays the whole society is thinking about this problem, but also because trade unions, which were frequently formed mainly by male workers, didn't take or didn't pay attention to these problems. So whereas the number of female workers join trade unions, problems concerning women become more important for unions as well. Mm-hmm. So my answer would be not directly, but I really believe that indirectly there's a connection.
Okay, so good, Björg. I hope that answered the question for you. We've got 2 more minutes, and someone else asked a question. I think it was Caroline. Caroline Chapin, did you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure, sorry, I know it's not like the most insightful question, but I'm always surprised when I see data around gender pay gap, and it was really interesting to see the difference between Luxembourg and the UK, for example, in Spain. So, but you didn't say anything in terms of the way it was calculated to give a bit more, I mean, for me, to give me more understanding of what we are seeing on the graph.
Mm-hmm. Well, in that case, is the percentage of the female workers' salary divided by the percentage of male workers' salary. And well, it is a percentage of 100 minus this share. So this index is including all kind of salaries in all sectors and all kind of skills as well. So it is not the best measure. It is the variable that we have in order to assess the problem. For example, in the case of the ILO, it is mentioned in my slide, so you can, if you can, the organizer can share it and you can click on it. They try to adjust this index by focusing on some certain sectors, or by excluding sectors, or by focusing on people with the same skills, in order to have a variable or an index a little bit more precise. Because obviously, if we compare a sector in which male are overrepresented and the salaries are higher with a sector in which females are overrepresented but with lower salaries, the comparison is not the most appropriate one, and the result is not going to be good enough. Anyway, the definition is common for everybody. It is included in Eurostat, and it is used also by the OECD and by the ILO. And so the comparison between countries, that's the good side, is quite good just because we are following the same definition and the same rules.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Mute. Thanks, Daniel. That was really interesting and great to hear. I suppose we're all waiting to see now. We'll want to see you again in a year's time to see how effective the law changes have been in Spain. We'll see that little graph at the beginning. Okay. We expect to see Spain lower down in that graph in the future.
Yeah, it will be a pleasure.
Okay, so now let's turn to our next. What I should have said, actually, by way of introduction to our next speaker, is that I'm involved in a project, Scott and I are involved in a project with Daniel and others, a European Union project, ACT, it's called Act on Gender, and there is a link, there's a kind of link between Daniel's presentation and our next speaker, but it's not quite as direct as that, in that Ragna was introduced to us by Finnborg also at the University of Ireland, who has introduced us to Ragna. And Ragna Kemp Haraldsdóttir is also at the University of Iceland. And she's going to talk to us. We really wanted someone from Iceland at this workshop because Iceland is like top of the world league on gender equality. So we really needed someone from Iceland. And Ragna is our representative from Ireland, and she's going to talk about is the kind of work that women do is work done by women worth less, and the equal pay standard in Iceland. And she is a assistant professor on information science, so another discipline that we're reaching out to here at, as I said before, the University of Iceland. And she's going to be talking to us today, as I say, about the kind of work and the equal pay standard for women. So Ragna, over to you.
Oh, thank you, Fiona. I'm going to start by sharing my screen with you. I have some slides, not that many though. Do you see my screen now? Yeah, great. So again, thank you so much, Fiona, for the introduction. As she said, I'm going to introduce this research that is at its starting point or in the middle of, which is called "Is Work Done by Women Worth Less Than Work Done by Men?" And it's based on a study on the equal pay standard and the possible benefits of using that standard as well. Just to start, this is the research team working on this research. And actually, Guðbjörg Andrea, which was asking earlier, is in the audience right now. So our research is funded by the Icelandic Equality Fund. And this picture is actually taken at that occasion. And there we are with our Prime Minister, Mrs. Katrín Jakobsdóttir. It is important also to mention that we are simultaneously employees within the central administration and academics at the University of Iceland. Thus, we have been actively involved in the implementation of the equal pay standard for our university and a part of a steering committee, which was founded by the rector. We have therefore both practical and theoretical experiences of working with the equal pay standard and its requirements. Interestingly, the university has been working according to an equality action plan now for 2 decades. The original plan was approved by the University Council in 2000, and the current plan is the 5th of its kind. Such a plan is actually one of the requirements of the equal pay standard. Also, the university has implemented an equal pay system in accordance with our policy for human resources. And this includes a section on equal pay policy, which is another requirement of the standard. And I must also mention that the university received their certification for equal pay system in April 2019 and is annually audited to make sure that the system stands. Just to explain the standard shortly, Iceland is the first country to require organizations to acquire a standard certification for their equal pay system. And the standard was first established in 2012. And at that point, it was voluntary. A bill of law was passed by the Icelandic parliament with a mass majority, and the law came into force in the beginning of the year 2018. At that point, the implementation of the standard was mandatory. The new legislation requires that companies and institutions, both public and private, with 25 or more employees on an annual basis, must obtain this certification based on the requirements of this management standard, and in order to verify that they offer equal pay for work of equal value, regardless of gender. And the aim of the Icelandic authorities is with this obligatory certification, is to close the gender gap by 2022. International standards, ESO, International Organization for Standardization, which is the international standard organization, they are internationally agreed on by experts. That is, one can think of them as a formula that describes the best way of doing something. The Icelandic equal pay standard is based on the same prerequisites as the ESO, the international standards, which is plan, do, check, act. And by planning, that is policy making, vision statement, action plan, doing, that is actually to work according to documented and planned policies and actions. Check, it is important to check both to audit internally and from external certification offices to make sure that the system is working as required. And most importantly, to act, that is to find the non-conformities, the errors, the possible discrimination, and so on, and make sure that you make the right corrective and preventive actions. The implementation of the standard is considered challenging. It's a challenging commitment, but it has many benefits. For example, structural. Formal findings in studies have indicated that the decisions regarding wages and wage systems are better structured. They have changed from being from spaghetti to structure, as called by so eloquently put by an interviewee in one of the research. Gender equality includes a more transparent, like Wanda mentioned in the start of this convention, that transparency is key. It makes a more transparent and fairer payroll and the possibility for appropriate corrective measures if non-conformities are found in a wage analysis, which is annual. And it's fair to mention that the team, the three of us, through our experience at the University of Iceland, we have actually found issues that have been taken into corrective measures. So we have actually personal experiences of the benefits of the standard. The EPS as a quality standard creates an opportunity also to change the way work is done in organizations, not only as regard equal pay, but also in quality management and information governance in general. Just for the fun of it, I had to put these pictures. It's just to manifest the idea of a wage system in shape of spaghetti. Prior to the equal pay system becoming law, there was this small pilot group that took the lead in 2012. And one of these was the Directorate of Customs. And the HR manager there claimed that the implementation of the standard was pure quality management. And also at the Ministry of Welfare, a senior advisor stated that the pilot there in 2012 was an eye-opener, and that the experience had really, that no employers want to discriminate, but the structures exist in such a way that they do. It's simply a result, she says, it's a quote, of an unconscious gender bias in our societies. So one might say that the implementation of the equal pay standard is like building an underlying constructural system in order to give strength or shape to, for example, a building or a system or a wage analysis and so on. Despite as you can see, the World Economic Forum has says that Iceland is in the top row, but despite of these results, critics claim that Iceland is no feminist paradise. It seems to be equal on paper, but not in practice. Studies show that women are still outnumbered than men in positions of authority. And I just added this slide while I was listening to Daniel, because the Global Gender Gap Index was first introduced by the World Economic Forum in 2006, and it's a framework for capturing the magnitude of gender-based disparities and tracking the progress over time. And in this list, you see Iceland at the top, and all the Nordic countries actually. You can see Spain there, and also United Kingdom. So I just added this for interest. Former analysis have also revealed critical attitudes towards the equal pay standard. It's not a perfect system. The law mandates a large number of organizations to implement the standard. Thereof, there are approximately 560 organizations with only 25 to 49 annual staff. really small organizations. And the criticism has also been pointed at how supervisory authorities, audit and certification services will be able to regulate the standard due to lack of funding and paucity of staff. And Business Iceland, which was a member of the technical committee of the standard, expressed serious doubts in 2018 when the standard became mandatory, because it was never their wish that the equal pay standard would be mandatory or put into law. The idea was that the standard was to be optional, as something that the organizations could kind of decorate themselves with. The criticism has also been pointed at the fact that the standard does not include the comparison between different workplaces in a similar sector, which reminds me of what Meghan was talking about earlier. That is that people might have equal work of equal value within organization A and organization B, but they are not compared between the two, and their pay may differ. And there is also a risk that smaller organization might delay further hiring if organizations were on the border of having 25 or more staff on an annual basis. And the reason is not that they dislike the standard, it's more that they lack the infrastructure to carry out the complex and expensive task of implementing the standard. And it's also been criticized that organizations may not pass the evaluation in its strictest sense. That is, not everything is also always included in the wage analysis, such as pension, assets and funds, and so on. And it's an important issue that we actually, the team, intend to study in our research. That is, on what grounds the wage analysis is processed and the requirements of the standard, as the requirements of the standard does not include a description on whether the wage analysis is based on, for example, 1 month or an entire year, and so on. So back to the research. It is an ongoing research, and the first results are expected to be ready, hopefully in May, June. It's both qualitative and quantitative. We are studying 20 organizations with semi-structured interviews, mostly with HR managers or compatible managers in these organizations. And we are also using an analysis of data from Statistics Iceland. They have a survey on wages, earnings, and costs to test whether the gender pay gap has reduced within these organizations that have implemented the standard. The organizations that are participating, they operate in different business sectors. They are of different sizes and shapes and situated differently in the country. And as we are using this study, this survey from Statistics Iceland, we are able to look into data collected prior to the implementation of the standard, as well as after the implementation, and the first 1 to 3 years after the implementation, to see how the organizations are maintaining the equal pay system. And the target population of this survey contains all business units, companies, institutions, municipalities, and so on. And I'm not sure about my time. I'm trying to talk really fast. But I have just one slide left, actually.
Yeah, oh, that's fine, Ragna.
Yeah.
That's fine. Yeah.
This is the final one. It's just I just wanted to show you kind of the current status as it is now. It's just I just looked at the website of the Directorate of Equality in Iceland, and as we are on the 25th of January, this was the situation, that 285 organizations have implemented the equal pay standard out of 1,180 that are supposed to do it. And a total of 88,827 employees work within these 285 organizations. The biggest ones had to implement first, and then the smaller ones and the smallest at the end. But the time limit for all of them is December 31st, 2022. And then all of them should have implemented the standard by that time. So clock is ticking, the time is clicking. But that was all for me. I just want to thank you for the opportunity to take part today, and hopefully there are some questions.
Thank you very much, Ragna. And it's, again, interesting to see what is going on in other countries and how other countries in your case, Iceland, are trying to address the problems that were talked about in the first half, in the first part of the workshop. Caroline's got a question. Did you want to talk to it, Caroline, or did you want me to summarise?
You can summarise, Fiona, it's no worries.
Oh, very kind of you. You can correct me if I get it wrong. Caroline, in view of the last point you mentioned, Ragna, it was interesting to see how few organisations had adopted the standards, if I've got that right. And yeah. Caroline was asking if there's any support given to organisations to adopt the standards.
Well, yes and no. There is support, but it's not enough. It's not enough, especially for the smaller ones. The reason I don't know how much you know about our country, but it's a reasonably small country. There are about 350,000 inhabitants total. So it's in regards to the implementation of the standard, the biggest organizations had to implement the standard first. And the biggest ones, for example, the University of Iceland is one of the biggest institutions. We have 4,800 employees. It's not that many institutions that have many employees. I think the largest one have about 10,000, 12,000 or so. Most of them are small institutions, and this is really difficult for them because they do not have the infrastructure. They may not have a human resource manager. They may not have a quality manager or a person responsible for records managing. These are all issues that are requirements by the standard. That is, you need to document everything that you do, every step of the way, and you need to implement work processors in accordance to quality management in order to fulfill the qualifications of the standard. And this has been hard. For example, for the University of Iceland, even though we are a big institution in Iceland, we hadn't implemented another standard, international standard, prior to the equal pay standard. So we had to work from scratch, and that's one of the criticism that has been opened up, that the help, the support needed for especially smaller organization has to be better in order also to for them to be able to do this faster. And also another thing, certification services. We need to go through an accepted certification service for external audits. And those, for a long period of time, there were only 2 certification services that were allowed to certify. Now they are 4, so it's a bit better, but they are still way too few. So there is kind of a bottleneck syndrome here.
Well, it seems, Caroline, you hit the nail on the head with that question. Thank you very much, Ragna. There's another one. We haven't got time probably for you to answer this, but it's nevertheless a very interesting question. Eleanor Wilson asks, how does it feel to live in one of the most equal countries in the world?
Listening to the first 3 or 4 lectures, and especially regarding the academia, which is my personal working environment, I feel fortunate, if that's a short answer to a really, really big question. But it's not as if it's all perfect here. We still have issues, and we still have our goals. We need to do better.
Okay. Well, thanks, Ragna. That's a good way to end this session. And thank you very much for giving that perspective. And right on time, we're turning to our last speaker, who is Tracy Warren. So we're turning back to the UK here. Tracy Warren, who's at the Professor of Sociology at Nottingham University Business School. And her talk is going to, I think, touch on the intersection between class and gender, and also returning to the elephant in the room, as people have talked about, COVID-19. Tracy is a sociologist who looks at work and employment and social inequalities, and particularly the intersection with class and gender. But she's also, I was interested to see one of your latest publications, Tracy, where you've actually also, you haven't omitted men from your studies. So you have been looking at the jobs of men as well. So practicing equality and inclusion. Over to you, Tracy.
Thank you. I'll just faff around and try and share my screen for a bit. So from Iceland to the UK. Oh God, hold on. Not working. Is that working yet?
Yeah, working perfectly.
Okay, I set my stopwatch. I'm going to go. So thank you so much for being here. It's just lovely to be part of this amazing event, and I'm following such impressive speakers. I'm going to talk today about gender inequalities and work in the UK, obviously, but I'm also interested in inequalities amongst women, both up to and into the pandemic. I'm talking mostly about class, but at the end I'm going to talk about intersectionality. And so this first slide is basically the context for a lot of my research over the years into gender and work in the UK. And, oh, sorry, something just popped up. In particular, the gender arrangement of the UK that I'm sure you know has been termed the male breadwinner, female part-timer, 1.5 earner model. And my research over the years has been interested in whether this is a stable model, whether it varies, and what are the ramifications for the lives, the working lives of women and men, both, as Fiona just said. And we know that this model is strong in the UK, but it's also intensified. So it's not just part-timers and male full-timers, but the hours worked by the part-timers, most of whom are women, are shorter than in many other countries, and the hours worked by the full-timers are long. And we know that this model is also strongest in working class homes in the UK. So if you think, for example, if you think of a mixed-sex couple with dependent kids, then those long hours, those long full-time hours worked by men are really tied closely to the part-time and the short part-time hours worked by women. And obviously this, this workshop is thinking about change and no change. And I'm a sociologist, and my discipline has for centuries been interested in issues around change, the size of change and the nature of change, the speed of change, and also what stays the same and why. And it's been quite interested in what happens around so-called unsettled times. And you know, and gender researchers are also interested in the potential and the ramifications of such unsettled times. So you've got Barbara Risman up there in the US, you've got Diane Elson in the UK, thinking about what unsettled times bring good opportunities for challenging the way we work, or for reinforcing gender inequalities. And in my own research, I've looked at various unsettled times in the UK and elsewhere, and I'm going to come back to COVID in a bit. So as I said, I'm looking at class. I want to talk about money as well as time, and how important it is to look at both when we're thinking about analysing inequalities in working lives. And there's a lot of people have said, well, today, if we're thinking about gender inequalities in working lives, then we know that women's lower earnings compared with men's are shaped by their far heavier responsibilities for caring, for unpaid domestic work. And we know that their caring roles bring significant impacts on their work time over their lifetime, impacting on pensions, for example, as we heard earlier, plus the shorter hours when they're actually in work to manage, multiple shifts. And certainly in the UK, working less than full-time hours is really associated with low hourly wage gaps among, in addition to this kind of established gender wage gap we've been hearing about. But then when you bring class in the UK, we know that working class women are far more likely to be primary carers than middle class women, in a more financially strained household context. And then if you bring in the class wage gap, which we talked about, then we know that working class women are found in those low paying sectors. You often hear about that, we've heard before, the 5C jobs of cleaning, catering, clerical cashiering, can't say that word, and caring. And this is essential work, but as we know, these key skills have been undervalued and under-rewarded for a very long time now. And the pandemic comes along and, you know, highlights to you know, many of us who didn't realise already how vital this work is. But of course, it's brought a variety of really serious risks for working class women's working lives, and also the finances of working class families. So I'm just going to give you some kind of general picture of gender inequalities and working life in the UK, because I know we have an international audience here. So, oh yeah, hold on, what am I doing? Yeah, so I'm just pulling off a number of data sets, some large scale data sets which are nationally representative. And I'm going to end with this one. I'll talk to you a little bit about the results from that. So this is part of the already established UK household longitudinal study. So participants in the big one were asked if they'd like to take part in a kind of a COVID survey from April onwards. 17,000 people participated in Wave A, and they filled in questionnaires over the many months. So I'm going to come back to that in a bit. But first, let's just recap on I've just gone the wrong way. All right, yeah, just recap on what I said before. So in terms of interest in work time, the UK has long stood out in the EU and now stands out in Europe for this extensive part-time working, as well, I think it's important, these long full-time hours. So as stated, the majority of part-time workers are women, especially those with caring responsibilities. You've got part-time work heavily concentrated among working class women. Long full-time work is also gendered and classed, and we can sort of talk about that in the discussion if you want. And so this kind of extensive female part-time employment is really reinforcing inequalities in the UK. So just a little picture of what things look like in the UK. So this is figure 1 from the labour force survey in the UK. And you can see the percentage of women and men working part-time. And that's kind of giving you a bit of a signal of how women and men engage quite differently with the labour market in the UK, particularly when they've got caring responsibilities. So you can see the kind of flat lining and sort of slight changes over time. As Fiona mentioned before, I've been looking at those men, that black line, recently in other research. So we've got inequalities between women and men, and of course I'm interested here in the inequalities among women. So those part-timers are lower paid than the full-timers, but also we've got this hierarchy of job quality. Some work I've done with Claire Lionette, who I'll talk about later as well, in terms of differences between part-timers by the hours worked. So we've got an awful lot of women working short part-time hours in the UK for less than 20 hours, for example. And if you just have a look at their wages, and this is, this is hourly net wages of women. So this is women compared with women. And what you can see is we've got the full-timers on the top. In the middle, you've got the women working those longer part-time hours. And at the bottom, you've got those women working short part-time hours. So this is kind of, like I said, this is kind of a very established picture of disadvantage in terms of gender and work time in the UK. I want, and that takes us up to 2016, 2018, that figure 2. And of course, you know, what happens in 2020 is the pandemic hits the UK and globally. So I wanted to just talk to you for a few minutes about some of the findings from this new project, which was with Claire Lionette at the University of Warwick and joint with the UK Women's Budget Group. And I kind of stuck up this, it was a bit really sad sticking up this slide actually. This is when the BBC announced our first kind of lockdown, when the UK death toll had reached 335. So people in the UK, 335 a year ago. And that is a picture of Nottingham, where I live and work, in a far warmer and sunnier lockdown last year. When the COVID pandemic hit, we were told in the UK that we're all in the same boat. And of course, that's utter rubbish, because we know that it's been impacting and different groups in different ways. And for my research, some really starkly unequal outcomes in terms of impact on working lives. There's more details around the project if people are interested. So we're interested in the impact, the gender and class impact of the pandemic on working lives. So we look at that very broadly. We look at domestic work, we look at who went on furlough and so on. But for this talk, I wanted to look at earnings. So this is a kind of garish figure, actually. Those colours are a bit nasty, but if it shows you the gender wage gap amongst the participants at the beginning of 2020. So in May they were talking before the pandemic hit, and it shows this kind of light blue figure, the women's hourly wages as a percentage of the male median. We kind of see some slight change over time, and I think it's kind of interesting because that can look positive if men's wages have dropped. But what we also see there, which I'm kind of interested in here, is that real position of women working in semi-routine and routine jobs, often classed as working class by the Office for National Statistics. So working class women really disadvantaged and retaining their wage disadvantage. So finally, this is my last graph, honestly. Think about time. So this is hourly net earnings. What happens when you look at weekly net earnings? So if we're looking at weekly net earnings, again, as a percentage of the male median, then women do less well than men because of the difference in work time. But then you see those working class women faring really badly, really very badly. In the research, we also look at people's financial situations, how their subjective feelings about financial difficulties, and you see kind of increase in financial difficulties amongst the working class women. The managers and professional women report far less increase in financial difficulties after January, February. Right, just looking at the time. So, right, we've got gender and class wage gaps disadvantaging working class women. And of course, we do need campaigns for equal pay. But as others have mentioned today, an awful lot of people in poverty in the UK are in low paid work. And we have campaigns for an actual real living wage, which boosts the national minimum wage above its level. We've got concerns that benefit levels in the UK leave people living in poverty, people in work and outside work. And then if you bring in my interest in time, then we've got real concerns in the UK about the maximum working week as we exit the EU and the 48-hour maximum. We've also got growing interest, and I've done some research on work time underemployment, and this is a really class phenomenon in the UK, where certainly working class workers just haven't got enough hours. So we sort of really need a solid floor to the hours that people work. In terms of work-life balance, we also have concerns with suitable hours schedules. So working class people are far likely to have schedules cancelled last minute, changed without notice, which is it really impacts very harshly on working class women. And yeah, I mean, I talked about part-time employment, and we have, real concerns with the flexibility stigma, the flexibility scarring effects when it is women who are taking all of the flexible work. And then finally, in the UK, for those who don't know, class isn't one of the protected characteristics, but we know that it impacts really harshly on people's working lives, intersecting with those other 9 characteristics. I mean, I've focused today on class and gender, but I've started a new project just literally this month, joint with the colleague Lewis Torres in Nottingham, and we're going to be looking at women and men's inequalities, and we're going to have better data sets to be able to look at other intersections with other social inequalities. And I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Tracy. That was really interesting. Actually, it was before I just turned to a couple of questions. actually, in some ways, your talk answered an earlier question that was asked of Daniel in relation to does high female participation equate to a lower wage gap? And the statistics that you're presenting here for the UK kind of explain why there's high female participation in the UK, but also a wide gender pay gap. So, you know, answering that early question, I suppose the answer is no. There's, you know, that's adding to in depth. There's a couple of questions here. What Joan starts with, this is all rather depressing.
Joan, sorry.
And what did she say? It's all rather depressing. And talking about the importance of lobbying. Tony's asking something similar about lobbying. So I think, Tony, did you want to speak to your question by unmuting?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. If you were Prime Minister, and I wish you were, what policies would you introduce to improve the labour market situation of working class women? I suppose that relates to some of the points you made in your conclusions.
Right. Hi, Tony. Thank you. And
Nice.
Hi, Geraldine. Yeah, I mean, I think just going first for the lobbying one and then going to, you know, when I rule the world question. One of the real great things me and Claire are happy with this project, it's joined with the UK Women's Budget Group, who are just one of the, you know, sort of real strong lobbying organisations in the UK, if you don't know them, working with Forced Society. And this project that we got funding for is kind of you're not got funding for standard academic projects, so we have to be getting our stuff out and fast. And so have a look at Women's Budget Group yesterday did a where we are in 2021 with women and gender inequality, and we kind of we're looking at, you know, what's happened in this, and what month are we now, since March when the pandemic hit. So yeah, lobbying is really important and trying to make a difference. Yeah, in terms of Tony, thank you for giving me, I don't want that job, thank you very much. How dreadful to have to work in that environment with those people. But you're right, I mean, those slides, I said at the end, I was really interested in, I mean, this workshop today is about equal pay and equal wage gap, and I think that is so important. But I think I'd basically, you know, I'd recommend those things on this slide, remembering about time, remembering about money, and then I would then go down every single presentation we've had before and say, I want that from Spain, I want that from Iceland, I want that. And it is a bit depressing. It's back to Joan's point, it is a bit depressing because a lot of this good stuff that we have had in the UK was kind of, you know, part of our EU involvement. So, you know, and then back to my interest in men's work, you know, keeping men's work, paid work hours under control so that they have a role in caring and they're not exhausted. And, you know, so it's kind of a very depressing situation. And I should try to be perky. I should try to be perkier, but I'm not feeling pretty perky at the minute.
Thank you very much, Tracy. Well, I think we'll all vote for you. Sorry. Oh, thanks a lot. So we're nearing to the end of the session, and we're very pleased that Professor Cassell, our Dean at the University of Birmingham Business School, has agreed to end this morning for us all. And for many of us probably watching now, Cathy doesn't need any introduction, but for those who don't know Cathy, she's as I said, our Dean. She's been our Dean since 2017, and she's done lots of research in organisational psychology and obviously research methods as well, and been recently looking at diversity and particularly inclusion in a major high street retailer. And which we don't know who that is. So Kathy, if I can ask you to take over from me.
Thanks, Fiona, and thank you for asking me to come and close this morning. It's a real honour to do that, and I would definitely vote for you for Prime Minister as well. I think, in fact, perhaps we could have a job share of a number of speakers on the call. I think that would be fantastic, and maybe things might change in the right direction in a number of ways. So, as I said, yeah, thank you for asking me to do this. I feel quite honoured about it, and actually, I do feel quite positive about the research that I've been doing. We did meet with some of the directors of the company last week, actually, who are introducing a new EDI policy, and have got some positive initiatives. So I think in some places things are changing, but as we've learnt this morning, in this area, it seems to be a long journey, as you said in the title. I was just going to make a personal comment before we conclude. I've only been able to be on the call for the last hour, so I apologise that I didn't hear about the earlier speakers, and I think people might have mentioned about academia, but I think this is an area that never ceases to amaze me. I remember years ago being utterly gobsmacked when I found out that somebody who had the same job title as me in another business school, it had Dean as part of it, I won't tell you what the other bit was actually earning double my pay. And I remember thinking, goodness, that's really shocking. And of course, I went in to see my dean, and I just mentioned this guy, and he went, "I'm so sorry, Kathy. I got a salary increase, nothing like his." But then what really struck me afterwards was seeing his CV sometime later, assuming, of course, that he was just so much wonderfully better than me. And it wasn't like, I know academics, we know what our paper's like. It wasn't the same, really. And so what really interests me is that as women, I was intrigued by Ragna's title, is work done by women worth less than work done by men? And how interesting that some of us women actually get into the situation where we just assume that if somebody's been paid a lot more than us, then they're probably doing a better job, or maybe they do deserve it more. So obviously that's just a kind of personal note in terms of, I've had my own assumptions quite challenged over the years, you know, by some of the circumstances in which I've found myself. Academia, as you know, and you might have mentioned earlier, is not very transparent. Professorial salaries are still secret in lots of places, unlike other places in the world, and particularly in places in Northern Europe. And there's some quite interesting situations you do get yourself into if you're involved in any of these kind of negotiations. I've tried personally to do quite a bit of work in our school in terms of looking at gender equality and salaries at that level and at other levels. And there are some quite interesting situations you get into where in negotiating with professors, I've sometimes said, we cannot give you that salary because it would be unfair to other people in the school and would impact on our gender dynamics and that kind of thing. I've done that in two situations, once where a male professor has said, right, I'm not coming, and another one where a male professor has said, that's really great, I want to join your school. So I think some of these everyday debates we get into remind us of just how salient these issues are and how complicated those issues are. So in closing, I think what I'd want to say is, I think in terms of this discussion overall, it is really, really important, of course, and you all agree with this or else you won't be on the call. So it's really, really important that we're still talking about these issues, because 50 years on, as I become the same age as my mother or whatever, and the things that happened to her, 50 years on, things are still, although we have the legislation, there is so much more work to be done. I think it's inspiring, all the work that people are doing. And I think it's really important that we see this as a global issue, because one of the things we do learn from our colleague in Iceland, in Spain, is wherever, is how things are done elsewhere. And that can give us momentum to have different types of initiatives and take some of those initiatives being forward. I think it's also important that we have access to the kind of research that people on the call have been talking about. And again, that can give us inspiration when we get into our everyday arguments about why this is a crucial and important issue. So I just wanted to finish by saying thank you to all the colleagues here who are doing the really significant and important job of keeping equal pay on the agenda. It's a crucial issue, it's significant. As we've heard from previous speakers, it impacts on the lives of many, many women, as well as people from other backgrounds, other minority backgrounds, for example. And so it's really important that people are talking about it, and it's great to listen to everybody this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathy. That was a brilliant ending. I'm Frankie from the Equality Trust, and I just kind of round up everything for everyone who came along today, and just firstly on behalf of the Equality Trust, just say thank you to everyone who attended, all of our speakers. We've done a few kind of equal pay events now, and every time I just learn so much stuff, and you hear so much different perspectives. And I thought today, in terms of people coming from all over the world, it's just fantastic. It's great. It's so great to see. So I'm really happy about that. I'd like to give a big shout out to Fiona and Scott as well for their brilliant organising. They've been so really just well prepared. Everything seems to have gone really well. So I'm massive thank you for them, and then also obviously for everyone attending as well. Thank you so much for coming along, for sparing some of your time. I'm just going to note, so the session will be available. We'll get it on YouTube once we just kind of make a couple of edits to it, cut out the break. So that'll be coming along with a post-event email. And normally at the Equality Trust, we like to kind of try and promote as many actions as we can for people, and activism as well. So people can get involved with some of the theory they've heard today. So I'm just going to put in the chat now, and I'll send these out afterwards as well. But what we like to do, we like to structure it in quite a simple way. So we've got an action you can do right now, then maybe something later on today, this week and this year, and then tomorrow, and then next week that you can do just some simple actions around some of what the things that might have been discussed today are. I've just put them in the chat, and obviously the first one there is right now. I think everyone should just relax, because we've had 2.5 hours of kind of heavy conversation and lots of theory. So it's been nice to just take your time, get a coffee, have some lunch, and then moving on. I've put a link, and it will come out in the post-event survey as well, to a petition we're doing where you can just quickly enter in your details. It takes a minute, and you can email your MP, ask them to stand up for equal pay. So that's something you can do today. There's a link in the chat, and I'll send that out in the post-event survey as well. Tomorrow we've got a couple of really great podcasts at the Equality Trust. One, as Tracy was mentioning, there, Women's Budget Group, for their director, Dr. Marianne Stevenson. So we definitely recommend giving that a listen if you can tomorrow or this weekend. And then also one with Sophia Moreau, who is an activist and journalist who has a lived experience of an equal pay claim. And then finally, next week, if you can find the time, we've got a really great guide to putting forward an equal pay motion towards your trade union, which I'm sure will be something that people have done here before, or something that people like to get involved in. And there's also a link in how you can join a trade union if you're not a part of one. So I'll send them all out in the chat again, and then also in the post-event email. And like I said, you'll get a link to the YouTube video of this session, and also all the links in the chat. And from there, I'll close the conference now, but I just wanted to say thank you so much for everyone for coming. Well done to all speakers, and thank you again to Scott and Fiona.